Well, hello, and welcome to another episode of the Imperfect Men's Club podcast. My name is Mark Ilward, and I'm here as always with my good friend, colleague, and co-host Jim Gurley. And Jim, I suppose that our pregame today had to do, as it always does, with things that are going on in our lives and things we're reflecting on. And I for one, would suggest that because it's towards the end of the year, we're December 10th today when we're recording, everybody gets a little bit more reflective, I think, this time of year. And I think that's just going to accelerate over the next couple of weeks. But yeah, what we Jim brought to the table, talking about his dad, who I think you said Jimmy passed away in 2019, and so you've been reflecting on his life and his story, and it's kind of funny because last week's episode was about the concept of impermanence, that nothing lasts forever. And we both had a couple of relationships that are kind of coming to a close. And I think that's always the case. I think it just gets heightened when you're in the moment. But I think the notion here, the idea here that I'd like to get going in terms of conversation is that one: nothing lasts forever. Every man has a story. We're all interested in leaving an impact. This framework that you and I started building 5 years ago really wraps nicely around a lot of different life events, but certainly the life of a man. And then what Jim did is he put together a timeline kind of coinciding with his dad's time on Earth, that both world events and United States events, which just in first glance looks very interesting. And then as I always do, I'm going to bring my dad in because even though he's still alive, he's 97 years old, and we've all, my brothers and I are all talking about his story and events in his lives way more than we ever did. And I've even heard some new ones recently, Jim, that even though I've been around for 64 years, I've never heard him tell me before, which is kind of cool. So
Mhm.
I'm going to pass it over to you and maybe invite you to feel free to dominate the conversation because it's your dad, and I'll kind of chirp in when I feel like I have something to say that's relevant. But I think this story, this conversation is relevant to every man.
Yeah, Mark, again, I always appreciate our pregame because we did some alignment in terms of the different frameworks. One, something that we created now over 5 years ago, the Imperfect Men's Club framework. But remember our tagline, the imperfection is the perfection. And the
Hmm.
reason that we use the word imperfect is everything's imperfect in life and nothing's permanent. We talked about that last week. So, yes, this is a time of reflection. It's also something I started doing on December 1st, and that is every week I would do a thank you letter or a gratitude letter. And so this week, this is week two, I decided to write my father a thank you letter, basically a gratitude. You have appreciation. So, but with this amazing new tool that we've discovered called AI, we can do things that were unthinkable. And when I say that, in simple terms, life is just data, and what data tells the story. So I took his life, which started in July 31st, 1939, and it ended December 10th, 2019. It turns out that that's 29,352 days he was on. Yeah. So
That's crazy.
almost 30,000 days, right?
Yeah.
Just short of 30,000 days. But so if the math is our life is just days and events and moments and
Hmm.
experiences. So I did that, and I laid that on top of what was going on in the world during that time, and we'll
Hmm.
we'll cover that next. But this is where the Imperfect Men's Club framework comes in, and for those of you that aren't familiar with it, when Mark and I started this podcast, we said, hey, we need a framework that we can um, that inspires to have these topics every week, and no particular order. The framework consists of the following: number one, our profession. And our subtopic, or say our subcategory, was our profession, because as a man, that's we define really our self-worth, right? And by the way, the Imperfect Men's Club is now turned into the center of everything is our self and self-awareness. So a lot of this is just self-awareness conversations. But yeah, the number one is our profession. And then we created two categories. And I remember doing this because I did this specifically thinking about my father, and that you and I are entrepreneurs, but that's a very different profession than he worked for the government. So he was a government employee for
Hmm.
35 years.
Hmm.
That's very different, right? And then our second one was uh, our relationship with the world, so worldview, and we created two categories, multiple categories, but in short terms, it was our relationship with the world, which was the blue team and the red team. He was a deep blue, red, blue team, which again is I'm very purple, maybe even slightly red at times. So that's different. But also our worldview is based on our childhood, and so the last 10 years, I should say not 10 years, the last 5 years since he's been gone, uh, I really got to know him because of the property that he gave to my brother and I, the family property, and the history that encompasses. So that explains also his timeline of life. Everything in life, I believe, is done in five interior increments. In his case, 0 to 10, which we'll go over. So that's your his worldview, and then the next one is his health, his mental health and physical health, and he had pretty good physical health. We were very different. I was more of an athlete. I look back now; he was much more of a scientist and even a stoic in a lot of ways. But his mental health, his physical health has always been good. But he clearly, towards the end of his life, his physical and mental health declined, which is very sad, but it's reality, right? He ended up dying with a lung condition, but also had some mental. Um, we all do have had some mental conditions that he never dealt with or that we saw towards the end. And then the next one was his relationship with others. Of course, my mother, mostly his daughters, and then of course his two sons and his brothers. He had a family of 10. And then the final one is our relationship with money. And boy, is that a relationship. Like I told you, he started off life with nothing. And when he exited, he didn't ever talked about money, but we he left my mom in really good position and left a little bit for all of us too. So successful, very well financially in the end. So what does that mean to us? It means that we're all going to write our story, and the question is who's going to tell it. So I thought, in recognition of him, that I'm going to aggregate all this information and share it with my mother, my brother, and my sisters. But um, but yeah, Mark, again, I think we can all find ourselves in the story, right? It was your words in the pregame. We all have a story. The question is, are we going to tell it, or how is it going to be told or remembered when it's over?
Yeah, I mean, what I know about your dad is what I've heard from you, and one of the things that I learned about him was that he was a quiet man, and
Hmm.
so wasn't prone to telling his own story. He was actually probably thought little of people who told their own stories in public. Keep it to yourself kind of guy, and I've always admired that. My dad's a lot like that too, but he's very open with his children about his story because he wants to pass along whatever wisdom he can pass along. I actually talked to him this morning, and one of the things he said was, among other things, is I'm so grateful for the fact that I grew up in poverty. And I'm like,
Hmm.
that's such a cool thing to say.
Yeah,
Because
yeah,
who would say such a thing? But it led him to appreciate everything, and
yeah.
I think he was born in 28. And
Wow.
yeah, it's
Yeah,
pretty
yeah,
crazy. But
that's the other thing is again overlay his life with the world events. So
mhm.
we'll start off with again our frameworks. This start off with the Imperfect Men Club framework of our worldview. So just to give you kind of context, his worldview. We'll start off with zero, right? The day he was born, and we'll do the first 10 years. But and we've talked about this before. I really believe the more that you get to know your past, your grandparents, I look at it as in a quadrant of four, right? You have a mother, a father. Basically, we have four grandparents. As you get to know them in that time period, then that's going to explain a lot of our individual behaviors, even our DNA and our generational trauma, which is a real thing. That's not, I don't put on
Hmm.
context in a bad thing, right? But yeah, just to give you an idea, where he grew up, where he was born, was in southern Colorado, and especially at that time. But yeah, his family spoke Spanish. He was, I call the ultimate American, as in that he was always American first, even though he didn't maybe look like everybody else because he had darker hair, darker skin, and different features. He never labeled or identified himself as anything other than being American. And yeah,
Hmm.
he would slightly talk about his heritage, whether his last name being French, but he was really mostly Latino, and that
Hmm.
spoke, and his parents spoke Spanish fluently. He also had 10 brothers and sisters, and was grew up at a time and a place where there was nothing, and then there was an accident. My grandfather was in the it was a coal miner, and there was an accident, and him and his 10 brothers and sisters had to leave immediately and drove to California, and
Hmm.
that's why I'm here. So that's the short version of it. But when I got to know his grandfather, and of course my great grandfather, his grandmother, then all of a sudden things start to make sense of why he is the way he is. It's just a
Yeah, yeah.
fascinating exercise.
It's interesting. And would you like me to read some of the world event, U.S. event
Yeah,
stuff?
if you could, yeah, like you said, let's just start off on zero, day one, right? July 31st, 1939. What
Yeah.
happened? What
So
was going on?
in the world, World War II is imminent with the global focus on the expansion of Nazi Germany, which had recently invaded and occupied Czechoslovakia. And then back home in the U.S. during that year, at that particular time, the U.S. remained officially neutral as the Depression era ended, but major events like the first ever NCAA men's basketball tournament took place. That's
Interesting.
cool. Yeah, that's very
Yeah,
interesting. Yeah.
yeah. So I don't know where this comes in, but this explains a lot about, yeah. So the war was just, it was expanding. The war was expanding. Yeah.
Yeah, imminent. Yeah, it was
But
just about to
imminent. But
start.
but
Yeah.
also, weren't we just coming off the Great Depression? So money
Yep.
really fits into this. As what I said, when we created this framework, a lot of this I kept in mind. But remember, he came into the world when money was really scarce. I mean, they
Yeah,
were they,
my
they
my
were
dad too.
poor.
Yeah,
Yeah,
my
yeah.
dad too. And poverty was I think you were lucky if you were poor. Unfortunate if you were desolate, but maybe fortunate if you were poor. I mean, dude, isn't everything so relevant? It's just so relative, you know.
Yeah, it
So
is. I'm
and,
glad you mentioned that. It's all relative based on life lived experiences, right? So
yeah, yeah.
so
And
yeah,
by the
okay,
way,
let's have some fun with this. Yeah,
my dad had 10 brothers and sisters as well.
interesting. Explains a lot. And you're from a family of four,
I am. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I'm from a family of four. You're
Yeah.
the middle.
Top middle. Yeah, I'm the second born.
Yeah, I'm the third of
Yeah.
middle. So yeah, a lot interesting that lines up. So yeah, go to 19. So 10 year. Again, I do these in 10-year increments. So
Yeah. So in
1949.
1949, the North and in the world, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, was established. The Soviet Union lifted the Berlin blockade. Mao Zedong proclaimed the Republic of China. And at that same time, in the U.S., Harry S. Truman began his second term as U.S. president, and the U.S. was a founding member of NATO. So,
Interesting.
yeah, yeah.
So the wars now. When did the war end?
The war's over. I think, depending on what
Yeah,
part of the world you're talking about, it came to a conclusion, I think, in the early 40s. So
yeah.
43,
40s. Yeah,
44, something like that. But
yeah.
you call me a history buff. I don't. I think that might be an exaggeration. I am
Again,
a
just high level context,
I am
right? But
very
but he's 10 years old, and
yeah, yeah,
Truman is the president, so it gives you kind of an idea of why being an American was a big deal. We win the war, right?
yeah.
He's part of that era where, and also keep in mind that even if he was 10, there was no TV. There may have been a radio.
Well, I also
So
think I would venture a guess that part of his patriotism is because of the timing of his birth. He's a kid when we win the war, and all he's
yeah,
probably hearing about is patriotism, you know,
yeah,
and
yeah,
and how powerful we are and how everyone looks up to us. So that probably was
yeah.
embedded in him, I would imagine.
Anyways, well, that's just kind of what comes next, and I have a whole other separate sheet on the technologies that were coming about because it'll explain also what he did in his profession. But yeah, so let's move on to 10 years
So
later.
So 1959, he's 20,
He's
and
20. Yeah.
in the world, Fidel Castro assumed power in Cuba in February. The Antarctic Treaty was signed by 12 countries, designating Antarctica as a scientific preserve. And then over here, Alaska on January 3rd and Hawaii, August 21st, became the 49th and 50th U.S. states. NASA announced the selection of the Mercury 7, the first U.S. astronauts. 1959. Wow.
Interesting.
That's
Yeah.
crazy. And he's
So
20 at that time.
he's 20. Yeah. So to keep that in mind, he meets my mom when he's 15. So and he gets married around 20. So now he is married, right?
Yeah. And he's got
So
some,
the relationship when we talk back to the Imperfect Men's Club framework, now his relationship with his wife begins.
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah. And I'll just, before I go to 1969, I remember my dad telling me a story where he told his mother and father that we're going to have a man on the moon someday, Dad. And they thought he was out of his mind.
yeah,
Jesus, Mary, and Joseph or something like that.
yeah.
So,
So Mark, I'm glad you mentioned that because again, what an achievement, right? As an American, first we win World War II, and then we put somebody on the moon. So
yeah,
what an influence or an impact that must have had on his life, and it explains also what he ended up doing in his career. And I'll get to that as we go on. But yeah,
yeah.
go ahead and move on to the next one.
So, yeah, 1969, the
Hmm.
Apollo 11 mission landed the first humans on the moon in July. The Concorde jetliner had its first test flight in France. And then over here, the Stonewall riots in New York began the modern day gay rights movement in the US. The
Yeah,
Woodstock Music Festival drew hundreds of thousands of attendees. So I was 8 in 1969, and I
mhm,
certainly remember Woodstock actually I remember it as being a little bit older, but I was only 8.
yeah.
But yeah, that's a
So he's
seminal
30 years
moment.
old. He's
Yeah,
married. He's probably got a couple kids. And then you've got this hippie movement. Remember, now we're living in, and he's going to Berkeley, California every day because that's where he worked for the University of Berkeley in the Lawrence Livermore labs, which is radiation labs, which
yeah,
again, I'll get to how he was on I'll just talk about it now. I've got some great pictures, but he was actually working for a startup, and that startup was funded by the US government, and it changed, well, it changed a lot of things, but it was radiation. So he was on the team that built the, the camera that would take pictures, which is radiation, take pictures of human bodies, and then they do the dyes and all those different things. So he built uh, all the electronic equipment that was used to develop the technology, but also to execute the technology of how now it's how we cause or treat cancer,
yeah,
all kinds of different cells by dropping dyes into the human body and then taking pictures of it, how it moves around the body. So he was part of the team that built all that. And yeah, I got a really cool picture of him, this huge camera of, and so when it's funny because we talk about startups, but he was part of the team that really changed the world when it comes to technology of pictures imaging,
yeah,
which
yeah.
is
That's cool. That's
yeah,
cool.
it is kind of cool. So
Yeah, yeah, it's a good thing you have those pictures. I would advise you to get those digitized as fast as possible. Those things can disappear quick nowadays. But
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
1979. So what's he in 79? 40? Yeah.
He's 40. At this time, he has four children, right?
Okay.
So, and it's the 70s.
Yeah.
He has maybe he's raising four kids. Uh, and this is the 70s. So this is when my brother gets really sick. He gets meningitis and
Mm,
almost dies. So
mm.
so yeah, this is again probably about 70, but a little bit before that maybe. And I remember the story or parts of the story, but he was going to die. My brother was going to die, and um, the equipment that was used to treat him or to find the problem was the equipment that he actually had worked on. So he got
Wow.
this. Yeah, that's what it was, meningitis. So they did some X-ray or some treatment that was based on the results that his technology had contributed to. So
That's cool. That's
yeah,
cool.
really cool.
Yeah, this in 79 is when the Shah of Iran was deposed, marking the start of the Iranian Revolution. And then over here, Three Mile Island nuclear disaster occurred in Pennsylvania, and the Iran hostage crisis began inside the American embassy in Tehran. Gosh, that seems like yesterday. I had my uncle who was not actually family, but one of those my dad's best friends, so he became my uncle. His nickname was Chicky. He worked at Three Mile Island. I remember being kind of close to that story as a teenager. Because 79, I just started my freshman year of college. So I was a sentient being by then, so I kind of understood what he was talking about. It was scary. I remember it being scary.
Yeah, a couple other things that again I was hold their timeline, but it's about technologies because ultimately he was really way ahead of his time when it came to technology because not many people even could comprehend what was going on. But
Mhm.
yeah, in 1979, the compact disc was created for the first time, so we were able to capture information using a CD, a compact disc. That was 79. But yeah, let's go and move on to the 89.
89 is the next decade. So or internationally, the Berlin Wall was opened in November, signaling the symbolic end of the Iron Curtain. The Tiananmen Square protests were suppressed in China. And then over here, the Exxon Valdez oil tanker ran aground, causing a major oil spill in Alaska. George H.W. Bush was inaugurated as president. Yeah, I think it's a function of being older because these things feel like they weren't long ago.
Yeah, but here's an interesting note about 19 that era. Now he's 50 years old. Okay,
Hmm.
so now all of a sudden I can relate more to him. And and then what else would happen in that time was the World Wide Web. That was the
Mm.
in 1989 was when the World Wide Web came in. So he was always really into the technology. I know he made a huge investment in Tesla and in Apple and did very well in those stocks because he understood the value of these technologies and what it could mean to later on. Didn't do a very good job of explaining it to people because he didn't talk much, but he clearly understood the impact that it was going to have on the world as it did.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. When you map technology and innovation out against the years past and the decades, it's pretty phenomenal how
Yeah.
fast things evolve. 1999, so he'd be 60 then, yeah. Well,
Hmm.
your age now.
Hmm.
So the euro was introduced as a currency in 11 European countries, and NATO began aerial bombing over Yugoslavia in March. And over here, the U.S. Senate acquitted President Bill Clinton in his impeachment trial. There was widespread public and technical focus on the Y2K scare. Man, I was in the middle of that shit. Placing software engineers, the world. You talk about manipulating the world with fear, and then the clock struck. 2000 struck. One, and nothing happened, and uh,
Hmm.
and nobody was held accountable. So I wonder. I don't know if he shared how he felt about that with you at that time, but what a joke that was.
Yeah, yeah, the politics. I'm going to share this story. I'll do the quick version of it, but at that time I was involved in some um it was like a high performance executive program where you went away for 3 days and you start off at 6 o'clock in the morning, went to like 10 o'clock at night, and you went through all these different things. And anyway, it was this thing in San Francisco. And one of the exercises you had to do is you had to go back and have a conversation with oh, you had to do what we're doing. You had to align your parents' life with your life in relationship to understanding them better. And so once you did that, then you would have a conversation with your mother, your father. And so I did this, and I remember like it was yesterday. I drove to the house, and by the way, if that person wasn't alive, you had to write them a letter. So
Mhm.
if it doesn't have to be your parents. It's just, yeah, that's right. It was your parents. So anyway, I go and I drive. San Francisco's only 20 minutes from where he lives. So I knock on the door. I said, "Hey, Dad," he goes, "Hey, your mom's in the other room." I said, "No, no, I'm here to see you." And he goes, "Oh, what's going on?" And I said, "Well, I'm doing this blah 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 thing, and I have a question for you." So, and you had to write these questions to get an answer for him. So we sit down and he says, I said, "Yeah, Dad, I realized that you never told me you loved me. And that was my thing. Like my dad never told me he loved me.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I'll
yeah.
never forget it because it was you sitting in his like chair that he sits in, and he turned the TV off for a second, and he looks over at me and he goes, he had this look in his eye like, you dumbass. Like, what, like, how do you not know I don't love you, right? So I'm making this big thing about you never told me you love me. And he looks at me like, I love you. Like, how did you not know that, right? And
Yeah.
then he says, hey, my dad never told me either. That's just not, I
Not what
show
men
my
do.
love.
Yeah.
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 But the reason I'm laughing is because I was made such a big deal about it. And to him, it was just very matter of fact, like, what? What are you talking about? I show my love by, you know, providing a home and all this. And he was a great father as far as always being there. And then I'll never forget it. I think to myself, well, that didn't go very well. I was supposed to be a little bit more emotional than that. And because he wasn't a very emotional guy. And I said, yeah, but Dad, I'd like to get to know you better. And he turns around, looks at me, and he goes, I'd like to get to know you better. Why don't you come around more often?
Well,
So much for that,
I think to some extent it's generational. I think, I mean, you talk the World War II guys, for instance, right? But all military guys, they don't talk about
Yeah,
that stuff. There was
yeah,
for
that's
a
right.
long time, we weren't supposed to talk about this stuff. And that's why what we're doing on this Imperfect Men's Club podcast is so special
Yeah,
because being emotional and talking about personal stuff doesn't have to make you a wimp.
that's
And
right.
they're not
Yeah,
mutually exclusive, but my
yeah,
dad, I think, was somewhat unique in that he was a military fighter pilot and for all intents and purposes, a tough guy. I never thought of him as a tough guy. He was resilient as hell. But I
yeah,
never, I
yeah,
used to have kids come up to me and say, "Man, I would not like to meet your dad in a back alley." I'm thinking to myself, "Who the fuck are you talking about? That guy's a teddy bear,"
yeah,
So
yeah.
it's opening up that conversation is how you get to know
Yeah.
about people that. But yeah,
Yeah.
don't make
I need to,
assumptions.
yeah, you're gonna love that. I need to slip in this one other quick story. Again, I'll do the short version of it, but it was another thing. It was, they had been married for, I don't know, 50, 60 years, and you could tell they weren't getting along. And one of my sisters called me and said, hey, mom and dad don't seem like they're doing too well. Can you go talk to dad? And I was like, well, I don't know about that, but okay. And they kept asking me. It's like, all right, I'll go. Same thing. Knock on the door. I'm going out, sitting in the same chair next to him. I said, hey, dad, I was talking to, my sisters and my brother, and, I noticed it, and I'll never forget it. I asked him about, what was going on, and he, same as before, he looked over at me. He goes, hey, Jimmy, I don't get involved in your marriage, and I don't expect that you get involved in mine. He goes, you don't know what's going on.
Yeah, that's
and
funny.
and I said, you're right, Dad. And that was it. I put my tail between my legs and I walked out the door. I called my brother and sisters and said, hey, that's their business.
Yeah.
And it was so true. And he was just so matter of fact, like, you don't know. You don't know what's going on. And
No, but I also love the matter of factness of it. It's just like you felt an obligation because of your sister and your brother, and you did it, and it was done, and you didn't get any feedback other than we're
yeah,
not going to talk about that, which is fine. You
which
know?
is fine, I guess. But I thought that was one of the best lessons I could ever receive, right? Like, hey, you don't know what's going on. I
Yeah,
don't get so,
that's funny. Well, hey, if nothing else, he was consistent. It sounds like.
oh yeah, yeah. A
So
man of few words, but whatever
yeah,
he said, you definitely remembered. So
we
anyway,
could use a lot more men of fewer words. So
yeah, I
So,
think
so
so.
2009, and so the H1N1 flu was declared the first pandemic of the 21st century.
Mhm.
Well, that was foreshadowing right there, I suppose, huh? And then at the same time here, Barack Obama was inaugurated as the 44th U.S. president. The Great Recession officially ended in June, though job losses continued. Yeah, that was a big year. I remember the whole Obama getting elected thing. It was pretty interesting.
Yeah,
But and
yeah.
then go ahead.
Does that wrap it up? Is that the final one?
No, no, I think today is the day. Today is the anniversary of your father's passing, and the day that he died, the Gambia presented charges against Myanmar at the International Court of Justice for the Rohingya genocide case. And over here, Democrats in the House of Representatives unveiled two articles of impeachment against President Donald Trump. So,
He just he I never saw him get so worked up about Donald Trump. He was the first what do you call it, Trump deranged syndrome? Yeah,
Trump TDR. Yeah, he was a TDR
yeah.
guy, huh?
He was a TD. Oh man, he did not like Donald Trump, and he this is somebody didn't say much this whole entire life, but towards the end, that's all he would talk about is what a piece of shit Donald Trump was the whole time, man.
Hey, man, everybody has to have a cause, I suppose, right?
But
You
no,
know,
I think in the end, like I said, I just so much appreciate him for his consistency. He never worked an evening, never worked a weekend, never traveled. It was a government job, but in the end, he provided what we all want from our fathers, and that's consistency and love. So
well, I think the couple observations to wrap things up from my end, and I'll pass it back to you to close. But I think thanks for sharing that. I think that it sounds like because he was a quiet man, that you didn't get some of this information until he was gone, and then you got to investigate, which is really cool. I have a lot. I spend my time now. I speak to my dad a lot more frequently because people like you and other people I know who've lost their dads, and I'm going to lose mine probably soon at 97. I don't wish it upon anybody, but it's a reality. But we've taken some video. I ask him. He tells me stories now because I pull them out of him that I never knew before, and it's really really interesting. I think that much like I think we all benefit from understanding history. We all benefit from understanding the lives of our parents and our grandparents. And it seems that most of us don't choose to do that or don't have access to that information until it's too late. So good for you. And every man has a story, man. And
yeah,
we all are interested in leaving some sort of impact. So
yeah. I'll wrap up with a couple conversations that we had that I'll never forget. And I think one, I've said it before, it was my 0 to 10 when I was probably 5 years old or around that time period. I was raking some leaves or doing some family chores. And I told him, I said, Dad, I can't do this. And he got really upset and he just, almost for the first time yelled. He never cussed, he never swore until later on when Trump got elected and he started swearing a lot. But he says, hey, Jimmy, I never ever want to hear you use that word can't again. He says, you can do anything you want to do, just don't use the word can't. And
yeah,
that was like his thing. Say, and that stayed with me. And then the other one was um, the I lost me. It's that's kind of it was an emotional moment, but
yeah,
oh yeah,
yeah,
the other one was that he would say there was never a shame in work. That whatever you decide to do in life, be the very best at it. Like there's the there's no shame in any job because again this is like probably 10 years later. That was maybe 15, and we didn't spend much time together because there was four of us. We never went out to dinner, but if you go to the dumps with him on the weekends, he'd buy you a hamburger, which was a big deal at that time, right? So he would
yeah.
say, I started to ask about work or something. He just said, yeah, whatever you do in life, just be the very best at it. So
Yeah, my
no
dad.
judgment.
Yeah, my dad was also big on there's honor in honorable work, and
Yeah,
I think it was in that space where he taught us. I don't care if it's a janitor or
yeah,
the dump the garbage guy or a doctor. They're human beings. They're doing honest work.
that's right.
You respect all of them the same.
Yeah,
So
that's a
good,
great way to
good,
wrap it up. But
good stuff,
that's
Jim.
good stuff. But like you said, every job needs to be valued and respected. Just be the very best at it. So very cool.
Every
Thank you,
man.
Mark. I appreciate it.
Yeah,
Let me share that with
yeah.
everybody.
Thanks for sharing, Jim. Till next
All
week.
right, till next week.
See you.